Elegant? Maybe. Focused? Certainly. Individual? Absolutely. This coupe model is the most dramatic twist on the Mini theme yet. Racecar looks are matched with race-ready handling, plus realistic running costs and surprising practicality. It's everything you wouldn't expect, and it's shaken up the affordable coupe sector in a way that few other cars could have done.
We've had over half a century of Mini motoring, but never anything quite like this. The Mini Coupe is essentially the first standard model two-seat Mini. It's the first to feature a notchback shape with a recognisable boot, and it's the first to stop hassling small sports cars and become one itself. And of course, it's this final step that's the largest and most significant. Just as the launch of the five-door Countryman sent this ambitious brand into a whole new family crossover market, so this coupe model moves Mini away from hot hatches and into contention with some of the most talked about two-doors in the industry. It's not a look everyone will like, but it's one everyone will notice. And isn't that part of the point of the purchase of a car of this kind? But is there more to this Mini than simply style? Let's find out. You can't help approaching a drive in this Mini Coupe with a sense of anticipation. At rest, doors open, it looks like a World Championship rally car at a staging service. On tarmac ready to go, it's like something from the grid at the Le Mans 24 hours. What will it be like inside, you wonder? Like a Mini, of course, but not quite as we know it. The dashboard is the same, so is much of the switchgear. What's different is this sharply raked front windscreen, which does just enough to create a more focused feel to the cabin. If you're at the wheel of one of the pokier versions, like this fiendishly fast John Cooper Works model, you can't help your heart beating just a little faster as you grasp the beautiful Alcantara trimmed steering wheel and fumble for the lozenge-shaped ignition key you slot into the dash prior to punching the starter button and firing the turbo engine into life. It's almost a disappointment that it doesn't flare up like a two-stroke kart, but all fireworks at idle are less important than passion under power, which is what's promised here. Let's see if it delivers. From a glance at the spec sheet, you might wonder whether it will. The engine wear for the coupe is, after all, the same as that provided for spicier versions of the Mini hatch. All derivatives feature Cooper badges in homage to the legendary John Cooper, Formula One designer, which means that they all share the same 1.6 litre petrol engine, BMW developed and British built, and offered either in normally aspirated 122 brake horsepower guise or in turbo form, 184 brake horsepower in the Cooper S and 211 brake horsepower in the John Cooper Works flagship variant that I'm driving here, which makes rest to 60 in just 6.4 seconds on the way to a top speed of 149 miles an hour, to the accompaniment of a wailing soundtrack and a crackling overrun. Even the much more affordable Cooper S version manages 6.9 seconds from rest to 60 on the way to 143 miles an hour, while the entry-level Cooper that will mop up most of the sales delivers rest to 60 in 9 seconds on the way to 127 miles an hour flat out. But as every performance person knows, real-world performance is more about pulling power than 0 to 60 stats. It's more about torque. And for this, the king of the coupe range is the SD diesel version. It's got 305 Newton meters of the stuff, and it's enough to fire it from rest to 60 in 7.9 seconds on the way to a top speed of 134 miles an hour. So those are the stats, good enough to make this John Cooper Works model the fastest volume-produced Mini ever made, though only by virtue of a fractional aerodynamically induced gain over the identically powered hatch version. If this coupe is to really justify itself as a sports car in its own right, rather than simply a trendier, truncated two-seater version of the standard Mini. It must offer more, much more. And fortunately, it can. Let me show you how. Let's throw the car into a bend. Now, I wish you'd been sitting here alongside me, because if you had been, you'd have noticed the lack of body roll and the tremendous grip. And as the exhaust roared and we powered onwards, you'd have been asking me to do it again. And again. And again. I don't know about you, but I'm getting a bit tired of all the Mini advertising with its adventure nonsense and constant references to go-kart-like handling. Here, though, is a derivative that really does deliver a go-kart-like experience. You sit low down in the centre of the chassis. The lightweight alloy wheels shod with Conti Sport rubber push right out to the corners of a body shell that's been pared right down for light, lithe response. You've bespoke design suspension that involves you right from the start, even if it is designed for smooth roads and racetracks rather than lumpy British lanes. One reason why I wouldn't advise making it still firmer by specifying the optional sport suspension, or even worse, going for the rock-hard John Cooper Works damping setup. I'm less convinced by the rather artificial feel of the electric power steering, to be honest, even when you firm it up by pressing this little black sport button down here by the gear stick. Now, switching to sport mode also is supposed to give you a rortier engine note, which is difficult to detect, and a sharper throttle response, which isn't really necessary. A more carefully engineered sport option is provided by the DTC, that's dynamic traction control, and EDLC, that's electronic differential lock control package, which works with the DSC, dynamic stability control, to give you less wheel spin away from rest and less wheel spin through the bends. And it's a tractional treat, especially when conditions are a bit greasy. For Mini magic through faster bends, engineers in search of an extra 40 kilograms of downforce have come up with the Mark's first lifting spoiler. Police in 40 mile an hour zones will be interested to note that it rises at 50 miles an hour before falling back into the bodywork when your speed gets down to 37 miles an hour or below. It's slick, just like the carefully considered ratios of the standard 6-speed manual gearbox, ratios that have been chosen for mid-range punch rather than highway cruising, which will be a bit noisier than some buyers will want. Still, this is a sports car, so you can forgive it that, exactly as those rakish looks promise. So, love it or hate it? You'll be in one camp or the other when it comes to the styling of this Mini Coupe. Penman Anders Warming says he was inspired by the efforts of British tuning firms who tried to create a Mini Coupe back in the 60s and came up with oddball designs like the Mini Marcos and the Broadspeed GT. Either that, or he designed this car on speed. It is, after all, to say the least, a little unconventional, sitting 23mm lower to the ground than an ordinary Mini. The raked back windscreen leaning into a so-called helmet roof design that looks either like a backwards baseball cap or like someone sat on the rear end, depending on the charitability of your perspective. To me, with its racy stripes and contrasting roof colour, it looks like one of those detachable hardtops that owners of some convertibles buy to clip on and get themselves through winter. And in a way, though the structure here is permanent, that's kind of what it is. You can also, you see, buy this car in open-top roadster form, a shape that sits a lot easier on the eye, but lacks the aesthetic extremity that makes this coupe rather endearing. But hang on, doesn't Mini already produce a convertible model? Well, yes it does, and indeed this car's whole platform is based upon its design. But the Roadster, like this coupe, is a far more focused thing. Imagine, for example, fitting the kind of active rear spoiler that rises out of what looks like a boot lid to a Sloane Street Mini convertible. Laughable, but quite appropriate here. And this Talking of boot lids, it is the first notchback booted shape the brand has ever bought us, assuming that you discount original 60s spin-off saloons like the Riley Elf and the Wolseley Hornet. Those cars looked practical but weren't, in contrast to this one that looks ridiculously cramped, but actually isn't. It hasn't actually got a boot in the conventional sense. The three-box shape actually disguises a lengthy and rather heavy rear hatch. Lift it, and like me, you may be astonished to find that, contrary to appearances, you've got a very large luggage bay indeed here. At 280 litres, the largest offered by any Mini model, bar the Countryman, a Mini that sits on a much bigger, very un-Mini-like platform. Now, this amount of space is nearly double what you get in an ordinary Mini hatch, and it's 20 litres more even than you get in the Clubman estate. Though it is true to say that the space on offer is shallow and the floor rather uneven. Now, the reason for this becomes clear when you take a seat in the cabin. Namely that the tiny back seats of the Mini hatch have been completely ditched. Now, that's just as well, for with a roof height dropped by over 5 centimetres over the normal Mini model, rear seat occupants would have needed to be dwarf-like. So instead of a couple of useless rear pews, instead you've got a storage shelf and a hatch which opens back into the boot, through which you can poke skis or long packages of up to 1.7 metres in length, or indeed reach back to retrieve small items from the boot. Behind the grippy 3-spoke wheel, it's a mixture of old and new. In the centre of the smartly trimmed dash, there's the familiar huge speedometer, which you tend to ignore in favour of the digital speed readout in the centre of the rev counter that sprouts from the steering column directly in front of you. And there's the usual chrome toggle switches. Less familiar is the cocooning feel created by the raked back windscreen and the lowered roof, which is recessed above both of the seats to accommodate taller occupants. Now, Mini reckons that just 5% of its total worldwide sales will be accounted for by this coupe model, but nevertheless has given potential buyers plenty of choice in a price span ranging from £17,000 to around £24,000. Those who like the idea of this coupe but want something with a rag top and the same rorty feel have the option for a model-for-model premium of about £1,100 of going for a roadster variant that shares the same basic design and offers the same choice of engines. Either way, most buyers, engine-wise, will opt for the entry-level 1.6 litre petrol Cooper version with its 122 brake horsepower power plant. But stretching up to the £20,000 price point will give them the choice either of the rapid SD diesel variant or the pokey Cooper S, which has a turbo 1.6 with 184 brake horsepower. Paying another £4,000 on top of that to go for the John Cooper Works model that I've got here, it gives you just another 25 brake horsepower, will be a step too far for most. So what about rivals? Well, a niche market this small coupe segment may be, but there are plenty of them for the same kind of money that you'd pay for this car. Well, I say that, the Mini actually undercuts most of them on price. At around £17,000, an entry-level 1.6 Cooper variant will save you over £3,000 on an equivalent Volkswagen Scirocco 1.4 TSI with exactly the same 122 PS output. Comparable Vauxhall Astra GTC 1.4 16-valve 120 PS is around £2,000 pricier, and you'd pay £1,000 more for a 124 PS Honda CRZ. The only sort of cars that would save you any money over the entry-level version of this Mini Coupe would be warmed-up versions of standard hatchbacks, cars like Audi's A1 1.4 TSI or a Citroën DS3 1.6 VTI. It's a similar story further up the range. A Mini Coupe Cooper S with 184 brake horsepower at around £20,000 will save you about £2,500 over a BMW 120i Coupe and about £1,500 over a Volkswagen Scirocco 1.4 TSI 160 PS. And both of those cars are slower. It's also, well, it's about £1,000 less than a Peugeot RCZ 1.6 THP and £500 less than an equivalent Vauxhall Astra GTC 1.6 Turbo 180 PS. Now, to find a cheaper car than the coupe in this form, again, you've got to turn to a more mundane hot hatchback. A car like a Citroën DS3 1.6 THP or a Seat Ibiza Cupra 1.4 TSI 180 PS, and both of those are slightly slower. What about a diesel Mini Coupe then? Can it maintain the same kind of price promise? Broadly, yes. The SD variant is at least £1,000 less than a comparable Vauxhall Astra GTC CDTI 165 PS. It's about £1,500 less than a BMW 118D coupe with exactly the same 143 brake horsepower engine. And it will save you even more over slower rivals like Volkswagen Scirocco 2-litre TDI or the Peugeot RCZ HDI 163. That leaves only the 211 PS John Cooper Works model that I've got here. Now, around £24,000 for this car may sound like a lot, but it's actually the same kind of money that you pay for the feeblest entry-level 160 PS Audi TT or the slightly slower Peugeot RCZ THP 200. It's also the same kind of budget you'll need for something like a Megane Renault Sport 250 and slightly less than a Volkswagen Scirocco 2-litre TSI or a Vauxhall Astra VXR, and a lot less than a BMW 125i Coupe. Now, whichever Mini Coupe you choose, either of the 1.6 litre petrol models, the Cooper, the Cooper S, or this John Cooper Works variant, or indeed the 2 litre SD diesel, you should find your car to be decently equipped. Of course, plenty of room though has been left for you to take a potentially expensive trip through the options list. In the basic tally, you can expect to find things like alloy wheels, park distance sensors, power heated mirrors, a 3-spoke leather covered sports steering wheel, a CD stereo with a DAB digital radio and an AUX in point, and a hill holder clutch to stop you drifting backwards on uphill junctions. Also included within the price is two-tone paint and these bonnet and roof stripes, though you can delete them if you don't like them, though of course it won't save you anything. Safety is catered for by the usual electronic assistance for stability, braking and traction control, and there are twin head and front thorax airbags. It's a pity though that the entry-level model doesn't include basic features like Bluetooth compatibility for your mobile phone, a height adjustable driver's seat, a USB interface and a multifunction steering wheel.
Keen drivers will want to consider the DTC Dynamic Traction Control System with the EDLC Electronic Differential Lock Control, both elements standard only on this John Cooper Works variant.
Lots of acronyms, I know, but what it basically boils down to is that with those two things fitted, you'll get less wheel spin away from rest, and you'll be able to get your power down earlier in the bends and fire this little car from corner to corner. Those who want more can specify stiffer sports suspension, while track fiends can opt for the super stiff John Cooper Works suspension setup with a 10mm drop in ride height and heavy duty anti-roll bars. You won't appreciate the effect of that little lot though on your morning commute. More luxury-orientated extra cost features fitted to plusher models include climate control, heated seats and a Harman Kardon hi-fi loudspeaker system. There's a mini navigation setup built into the optional mini connected system via which you can listen to, via the web, radio, Facebook, and you can even look at Google Maps. One Mini executive at the launch boasted of how you could listen to police radio on it, which might come in handy if you use all of this Mini Coupe's performance. And on all models bar this John Cooper Works variant, there's the option of a 6-speed Steptronic automatic gearbox with steering wheel controls. If you're splashing out on a coupe, essentially a pleasantly selfish purchase, then it helps to be able to justify it on environmental grounds. And it's also pleasing to find rock bottom running costs. Despite a 25 kilogram weight penalty over the equivalent mini hatch, this Mini Coupe can deliver on both those counts. It actually delivers fuel and CO2 returns that are almost identical to the hatch, and that means that it's the cleanest coupe of any kind that it's possible to buy. The headliner in terms of running costs is, not surprisingly, the SD diesel model. That manages 65.7 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and puts out just 114 grams per kilometre of CO2. And that means it attracts a benefit in kind tax rating of just 13%. And it also means you won't pay anything in the first year for your road tax licence. These figures are delivered thanks to what the brand calls its minimalism package of environmental technologies. These include all the expected things, so you get a gear shift point indicator, brake energy regeneration to reclaim the energy that would otherwise be lost under braking, efficient power steering, the lightest gearbox of its kind, thermal encapsulation of the drivetrain so that the engine warms up quicker in the morning, and most importantly an auto start-stop system that'll cut the engine when you don't need it, when you're stuck in traffic or waiting at the lights. The same benefits apply to the petrol models, with the entry-level 1.6 litre petrol Coupe delivering 52.3 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and putting out 127 grams per kilometre of CO2. There's not much running cost penalty for trading up to the Coupe S. That delivers 48.7 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and puts out 136 grams per kilometre of CO2. But if you go for the fiery John Cooper Works model that I've got here, those returns do take a bit of a beating. 39.8 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 165 grams per kilometre of CO2. Insurance costs should be reasonable. This model is pitched between groups 18 and 36. Though it may pay to shop around a bit between different brokers, because in recent years some insurers have taken to loading Mini Cooper quotes quite unreasonably. Servicing is an area where this Mini really excels in keeping down costs. You can buy it with the Mini TLC servicing program, which covers you for 5 years and or 50,000 miles at around 250 quid. I'd probably go for this same plan in XL form, which covers you for 8 years or 80,000 miles and only costs another £25. And that'll add to resale values, which are predictably buoyant. Experts like Cat Monitor reckon that this car will be worth between 45 and 47% of what you paid for it after a typical 3-year, 60,000 mile ownership period. And that outstrips rivals like the Porsche Boxster or the Audi TT, and it's far ahead of models from brands like Peugeot and Renault. It's also a better showing than you'll get with a Volkswagen Scirocco. Over a 3-year ownership period, you'll get about £1,500 more of your money back with a Mini Coupe than you would with the Volkswagen. It's ironic that in two unexpected areas, practicality and running costs, this Mini Coupe is so damnably sensible, because overall this is the kind of car in which sense and sensibility should matter very little in the purchasing decision. Leave the supercars to lottery winners. In the real world, this is how you and I can reward ourselves and buy something that's selfish, fun, and very, very fashionable. I'm aware that not everyone will see it like that. Some will stare down the unconventional looks of this car in abject horror, but then maybe that's why I like it. A personal purchase should be just that, personal, bespoke, individual, and able, when used as intended, to plant a very wide grin across your face. This Mini can do exactly this, and in that respect, it's everything the brand should be.